right, so the tire's holding air, no issues, just pedaling around for the first few miles. It might take a little bit more time to kind of seal, but things seem to be working really well. So there's a few things that I like to bring along with me on a bike packing trip and just regular day rides. Obviously, when you have a tubeless setup, it's a little bit more intricate. When you're bike packing, you want to be able to pack a handful of extra things that you probably wouldn't necessarily need on a day ride. So I'm going to get into all of that right now. We all carry things a little bit differently. I do have kind of a specific tubeless kit for my bike packing repair kit, and I'll kind of go into what's in this in a second. But then for my day rides, I have this little keg, or I'll put it in just like a saddle bag or something like that, a small one. So in the keg, we've got some pretty important items that I think are needed for all rides, and that is CO2 and a CO2 inflator piece. And these are important just if you do end up having a puncture and you need some quick air. This is a really good way of doing that. Tire lever, obviously important if you have to put a tube in. Sealant, I love adding extra sealant if I do have a repair or I plug a tire. Inside my small bolts container, I have quite a bit of items in here. The tubeless items of note, though, are a tire plug, and this is just a basic Genuine Innovations tire plug with a bacon strip already attached to it. That way it's ready to go. I can insert the plug into the tire when I need it, and then I have extra bacon strips for the plug if I need to put in multiples. And then among all these other bolts in here, I also have a valve core, and these are super nice to just carry around just in case you end up breaking yours. They don't necessarily malfunction all that often, but if they do, it's really good to just have an extra one. And then obviously the valve core remover tool just to take that valve out. There are smaller ones than this. This is a very bulky valve core remover tool, but it's nice to install and uninstall your valve core with this. Taped to the top of my small parts little bin here is curved needle and thread. And that is so you can stitch up your sidewall or a bike packing bag if you need to. So I like to carry a curved needle and thread. I actually carry two of them, two different sizes, just in case one of them breaks. I have thread attached to this tent pole crutch along with duct tape and some athletic tape. And this is just a basic, it's a pretty thick nylon thread, but it's worked really well for me in the past when I've slashed a sidewall. When I'm bike packing, there are some things, especially when I'm really going far, there's some items that I really want to bring along just in case I need to maybe reseal my tubeless system, retape it. So I do carry a small roll of tubeless tape. I forget the company that makes this, but this tape is great because it is a small roll. They used to come in small rolls all the time, not so much anymore, so finding a small roll is a little bit more challenging, but I got this at my local bike shop, and it's small enough to just kind of throw in this baggie. Typically on day rides, I'll have some cash on me, maybe a $1 bill or whatnot. For bike packing, I will as well, but I also will just carry some extra tire boots. These are just a variety of tire boots that I wanted to show. There's the Park Tool ones that are super burly. There's this Lesign one that it has like instructions to it and whatnot. It's pretty informative. And then this yellow Velo tire boot. And these are also just great to kind of have around just in case you need to use some extra fabric, or this actually has adhesive on the back. You never know what you can run into, especially while bike packing. I typically carry some more bacon strips. You just never can have enough of these. They're great to have. They're super light. They're really cheap and take no space. This is one of like 2 patch kits that I carry. I also have some duct tape. This can double as rim tape, but also just anything you need to use some duct tape for. And then maybe one of the more important pieces is super glue. So this is what I use to actually throw on the outside of a slash sidewall. I kind of coagulate this with some dirt after I stitch the sidewall, and it's worked really well for me. Some people use shoe goo. I have never used it. I've always used this with success. I love to carry just some alcohol wipes. That's really nice, especially if you have to retape your rim, just to get all the grit and grime off the rim. And last but not least, obviously a tube and a pump. As far as tubes go, I typically will carry a full size tube while I'm bike packing. That way it actually works really well. It expands and it is a little bit more puncture resistant. I know other people use just smaller diameter tubes based off of their tire width, but I think it's safe to say that when you have a tube that fits, you have a little bit more confidence. And then as far as pumps are concerned, I really like pumps that basically allow you to blow up a tire with as few of pumps as possible. And there's a handful of those out there. This one is just the Lezine pressure drive ABS flex hose. So basically the hose of the pump comes out of the actual pump and then twists in. This is nice just because you can kind of maneuver around the valve. All right, let's go for a ride and see what kind of trouble we can get into. All right, everybody, so what we're gonna do now is basically replicate a handful of issues that you might find trailside. I am in a controlled setting in my shop, but I figured this will probably be a little bit better for lighting and to show you a detailed look at what I do to kind of fix a handful of issues that we might run across. I'm going to kind of destroy this tire and fix it. So first things first, let's just poke a hole in the top of the tire to replicate running over something sharp like a cactus or a nail. So I'm just getting out the curved needle that I actually just taped to this box, and we'll get the smaller one here. And basically we're just going to poke a hole in the top of the tire. I'm gonna just pull it out really quickly. Obviously the sealant has already kind of run around the tire a little bit just before this, but I can't hear anything. So if that went through with a tube in there, we would be flat. Next step, let's put in a bigger needle into the top of the tire. All the sealant is down at the bottom. Its gravity is kind of pulling it down. So for the most part, there might be a small thin coating of sealant around the tire itself, but not too much. So let's pull it out. All right, so we actually have some air coming out of this one. So let's just spin it. I see a little bit of sealant here. When nothing's squirting out like that, you know that the tire is definitely going to be sealing itself nicely and you don't need to use a plug. All right, so what I'm going to actually use here is just the tire plug. And typically what we'll find is when we find a hole that's big enough to use a plug, a lot of times it's either something you ran over, typically like on the top, or it's because you compressed the tire so much that it actually pinched on itself. So you can still pinch flat, but you can't pinch the tube because there's no tube actually in the system. So a lot of times it's kind of right on the bead wall right up here. And so we're gonna replicate that and try to put a hole right in the bead wall. So here goes nothing. You can hear that. All right, so using the tire plug, this isn't quite big enough to require a plug. So basically, I'm going to try to stick this in there again and try to make it a little bit wider. Yeah. Oh, so it actually squirted out. I don't know if you saw that, but now it's bubbling up a little bit. But it's sealing. Get the knife out now on this sidewall. And what I'm gonna try to do is just poke a small hole in the side. All right, there we go. So that's a solid sidewall puncture now. And I keep kind of knocking it around and it doesn't wanna seal. So there it goes, it's sealed. But let's try to put more air in it and see what happens. Woo! Scared me. All right, so we replicated a puncture that needs a plug officially. So if we're out on trail now in this situation and we need to end up plugging our tire, the best thing to do, try to keep as much air in there as possible. So you're gonna want to kind of lean the sealant into that puncture hole. So whether the wheel is on the bike still or off, just kind of lean it into that area just to make sure that keep as much air in there as possible. It will just help you do a little bit less work pumping up the tire again. So I'm going to go to my repair kit. The process of putting in a plug is actually pretty easy. All plugs are a little different. You know, you've got the Dynaplug system, which is actually really cool. This is much, much cheaper. These Genuine Innovation insert tools with bacon strips. Oftentimes these bacon strips, if you want to kind of make them a little bit thicker, you can curl them in half like that. Or if you want, just use them like this. So I like to twist it a little bit and then kind of poke the majority of the bacon strip through this little channel here on the insert tool, as you can see. Then you go ahead and look for your hole again. And obviously I found it with some bubbling, and then air is gonna come out. So then just kind of with a quick motion, you just kind of go in real quick and out, and just kind of go straight into the tire. All right, so as you can see, we are in, and then pull it out really quickly like that, just to make sure that the bacon strip actually stays put. And it has, and it's in there. So let's pump up the tire and see if it holds. All right, so 31 pounds, plenty of air for this style of tire. Obviously you can trim these little bits if you want to, but really it's not the end of the world. So that's how you put in a plug. So let's cut a little hole in the sidewall now. I'm going to take some pressure out just so I don't make a mess. And typically when you slash a sidewall in the first place, you're probably going to lose almost all air pressure. So what I basically am going to replicate is having a rock kind of scratch the side of the tire and completely rip it. Ooh, baby. So what we're gonna try to do is plug it first, but the hole is definitely pretty darn wide. Obviously, you're gonna try to use your resources that you have. So, all right, I've got a plug. What am I gonna do? I'm gonna maybe try to double it up. So that's what we'll try to do first. I have the old plug that I just used, and I'm just going to fold it over like this, and then insert it onto the tool, and I'm going to just try to insert it into the tire. So it's in there, but will it hold? Let's see. Clearly the double plug didn't quite work. So you cuss a little bit more, and then you think, oh yeah, I brought a needle and thread. Just taking a closer look at the slash sidewall here. So what we're gonna do is with some water, or if you have any like rubbing alcohol, like I said, I like to carry the rubbing alcohol wipes, or even just antibacterial wipe. Try to wipe that clean, just like you would if you were about to stitch up a human being. And then what you'll wanna do is just take your jersey that you're wearing and just kind of dry it up, and then you kind of see what you're working with there. We're gonna get to the repair kit and take out the nylon thread, and this piece was already pre-cut for this specific task, and so I'm gonna use the small one, the small needle here. Go ahead and thread it, and just like you would any needle at the back end of it, make a big knot. So this is the knot that we do not want to come out of the tire. All right, so that's pretty good. So you want this piece inside the tire. So just think about that when you're starting. So you'll want to start from poking the needle through the actual cut and starting at the edge. And trying to go as close to the side as possible, maybe leaving like a few millimeters like you can see there. And then just kind of working your way through. And then what we want to do is tuck all that stuff in. All right, so now that we have the first thread through, then all I'm going to do is go to the other side, and I'm starting at the top and going down. And then oftentimes in my repair kit is a small little Leatherman. And if you have this, you don't necessarily need it. It's super helpful to kind of help aid with leverage. So then when you pull the needle and thread through, like you learned when you were a kid, then wrap it through so it locks. All right, and that is the start. So just keep doing that. All right, so now you can kind of see that I finished with the length. I'm started up and gone all the way down. What I'm going to do is actually go through some of these holes again and make my way back up. What I'm going to do is start locking this out and then make a knot and push it all the way down. And just do that a few times. All right, so there you go. You have officially stitched your sidewall. So then what you can do, cut off the excess, right? And there you go. So I'm going to just use this super glue just right on the side here. And what I'm not going to do is actually cover this up, because in the event that I actually need to get to it again, it's just going to create more of a mess if I end up covering it with something right now. So the goal here is to be able to seal up the whole system without actually needing to put anything else on the tire. So I've got super glue, I have the stitched up sidewall, and all I'm gonna do is hopefully let it dry and see what happens. And worst case scenario, I can actually start getting some dirt on there and coagulating it. But right now it's just kind of a waiting game. So we'll just let it dry. All right, so if you wanna speed up the process, you can kind of use just some old wrappers or something like that and kind of dab at it. And so basically just dabbing at it and blowing on it and just making sure that that layer dries before you put on another layer. I really like to throw on maybe 2 or 3 layers. I do this for 2 reasons. If I'm in a climate or a terrain where I know I'm going to run over sharp pointy things, this is a must, because once you put a tube in, you're just going to end up patching that tube a number of different times, looking inside your tire to look for thorns, and it's just not very realistic. So going tubeless is super important. And the second reason is basically all of those benefits of going tubeless. It just is a better overall experience. So those 2 reasons alone will have me stitching a sidewall before I put a tube in. Once that dries, you're basically ready to pump up the tire. But before that, if you thought you lost a lot of sealant, you can put more in. So that's what I'm gonna do right now. With my valve core remover, I am going to remove the core, and then I've got my stand sealant here. Make sure that top's on. Shake it up really good. Throw this whole thing in there. 2 fresh ounces. Throw the core back in and pump it up. And really, once we pump it up, we're gonna really just make sure that the whole sidewall that was affected has sealant just kind of laying in it. So I hear air coming out. No, I don't. So just really making sure that you get that sealant kind of over it. All right, well, when all else fails and stitching a sidewall won't work, plug won't work, sealant won't work, got to do the inevitable, and that is throwing in a tube. I'm going to put an even bigger hole in this sidewall and show you how to put a boot in so that a tube will not bulge out of your tire. Something like that will be a real big challenge to sew up. So what we're gonna do is just add a boot. All right, so what we're gonna do now is basically install the boot. So what we have to do is break the bead of one of the sides of the tire. In this circumstance, I'm gonna actually break the bead on the slashed sidewall side of the tire. That way I can actually maneuver and place the boot in properly. Important step, and this is why some people definitely consider taking the whole tire off all the time, just because it's easier to do this. But check the inside of the tire and make sure you don't feel any thorns or staples. Obviously be careful, but just make sure that there isn't anything that's too sharp. Obviously, if your tire was holding air and it all of a sudden lost air just because of the sidewall, you probably know why it's flat, but it's good to just double check. And then the next step is to remove your tubeless valve. We're going to be using the valve that comes with the tube. And so this valve comes out, and sometimes they're really stuck in there, so you may have to use a rock or something to like push it out, but there you go. And then typically these are still good, so make sure to put it in a safe spot. At this point, we are good to start installing the tube. So we'll take the tube and pump it up to a few pounds just so it has a solid shape. But typically I carry a tube that fits the tire size. So this is a Tyre Sparwood 2.2 and I have a tube to fit it. So yeah, this is a 29 by 1.9 to 2.3. So this will fit perfectly within that tire. Undo the end cap and the nut. Let's pump up the tube. All right. So just a quick tidbit. If you're interested in actually putting sealant in your tube, it can be done. I've never done it personally, but there are a variety of tubes that come with removable valve cores, and so that's all you need. I can't really speak on whether the sealant inside the tube works well, but I have heard of people using it before. Basically, at this point, all we need to do now is find the valve hole. So put in the valve first, tuck in the tube. Now it should look like this. Next is the part where we have to put a nice tire boot in this little hole. Take your tire boot, whatever one you have. This is just the Park tool. They're really thick. They're actually pretty nice. And just have it stick to the inside of the tire. At this point, we're going to install the other side of the tire. So first put on the valve nut. Next up, we're going to just put the other side of the tire on. In this case, just because the boot is up here, I'm gonna start with the valve and work my way to the opposite side of the tire. Just try to avoid pinching the tube between the rim and the tire. Another way to avoid actually pinching the tube is not using a tire lever, so use your strength. Okay, so just making sure that boot is still in place, and it is. We are now going to just pump up the tire. And it's nice because all we have to do now is seat one side of the tire. This side is already seated because we didn't take it off. That's one of the benefits of trying to keep one side on. All right, just like I would be out on the trail using my hand pump. All right, so I got that bead seated. It took some effort to pull in on the bead to actually seat it without putting too much air in it because I didn't really want to put any more stress on the boot. As you can see, it is definitely bulging out, but it's doing its job. This tire has seen quite a lot. We have a plug down here. We have a stitched up sidewall right here, and we have a big boot right here. And we have some small little holes down the center tread. All right, folks, and that about does it for our conversation on tubeless today. I hope you took something away from this. I know personally I love running tubeless just because it gives me a greater sense of confidence under me, and it also just eases my mind when I go out, especially in climates or desert areas, or when I know I might actually run into some sharp objects. Obviously there are some downsides, but there's definitely more good than bad. So thank you so much for tuning in. If you haven't done so already, please hit that subscribe button. That will just help ensure all of our videos pop up in your feed. And until next time, pedal further.